The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla stood at the tall windows of her private sitting room. Her reflection stared back at her, adorned in the sapphire tiara that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. The weight of the crown felt heavier than usual today, pressing against her temples like a reminder of the precarious position she now found herself in. 3 months had passed since King Charles III's unexpected death from complications following his cancer treatment. The nation had mourned, the world had watched, and now the dust was beginning to settle on a new reality that nobody had quite prepared for. William was king now, Catherine was queen, and Camilla found herself in the unusual position of being a dowager queen who still lived within the palace walls. She had always known this day would come, but somehow she had imagined it differently. In her mind, there would have been a graceful transition, a warm relationship with her stepson and his wife, perhaps even a role as the wise elder stateswoman, guiding the new generation. Instead, she found herself increasingly isolated, her opinions dismissed, her presence merely tolerated rather than welcomed. The first signs of tension had appeared during the funeral arrangements. William and Catherine had made it clear that they wanted a more modern, streamlined approach to the monarchy. They spoke of reducing costs, eliminating redundancies, and creating a more relatable royal family. Camilla had tried to offer her experience, her knowledge of protocol and tradition, but her suggestions were met with polite smiles and gentle dismissals. The breaking point had come the previous evening during what was supposed to be a routine family dinner. Harry and Meghan had returned from California for a brief visit, their first since Charles's death. The atmosphere in the dining room had been tense from the moment they all sat down together. William and Harry maintained a careful politeness, while Catherine and Meghan exchanged pleasantries that barely concealed years of unresolved conflict. Camilla had tried to play the role of peacemaker, sharing stories of Charles and how proud he would have been to see his sons together again. But as the evening progressed, the conversation had turned to the future of the monarchy. And that's when everything had begun to unravel. William had outlined his vision for a slimmed-down royal family, one that focused on the core working members and eliminated what he called unnecessary expenses. He spoke of modernizing the institution, making it more accessible to the people, and reducing the pomp and ceremony that he felt alienated younger generations. Camilla had listened with growing unease as she realized where this conversation was heading. When William mentioned the need to make difficult decisions about living arrangements and official roles, she had felt her stomach drop. She had spent years fighting for acceptance, years proving herself worthy of her position, and now it felt like it was all being swept away. The moment that would haunt her came when Catherine, speaking with the quiet authority of her new position, had gently suggested that it might be time for Camilla to consider relocating to one of the smaller royal residences. The words were delivered with a smile, wrapped in concern for Camilla's comfort and privacy, but the message was unmistakable. She was being asked to leave. Harry, perhaps sensing an opportunity to strike back at the institution that had caused him so much pain, had been surprisingly supportive of the idea. He spoke of the healing power of stepping back, of finding peace away from the pressures of royal life. Meghan had nodded along, her expression sympathetic but her eyes revealing a satisfaction that made Camilla's blood run cold. The suggestion that she move to Clarence House had been the final insult. Yes, it was a beautiful residence, historically significant and perfectly suitable for a dowager queen, but it was also a clear step down from her current position, a symbolic exile that would signal to the world that her time as a central figure in the royal family was over. Camilla had excused herself from dinner early, claiming fatigue, but sleep had eluded her entirely. She had spent the night walking the corridors of the palace, these halls that had become her home, thinking about everything she had sacrificed to get to this point, the public ridicule during her affair with Charles, the years of being compared unfavorably to Diana, the slow and painful process of winning over a skeptical nation. It all felt meaningless now. As dawn broke over London, she had made her decision. She would not go quietly. She had earned her place in this family, had stood by Charles through his darkest moments, had supported him as he prepared for kingship, and had been a faithful queen consort during their brief time together on the throne. She deserved better than to be pushed aside the moment it became convenient. The young royals might think they could simply reorganize the family structure to suit their preferences, but they had underestimated her. She had navigated the treacherous waters of royal protocol for decades, had survived scandals that would have destroyed weaker people, and had transformed herself from the most hated woman in Britain into a respected queen. She was not about to let William and Catherine erase her legacy without a fight. Her first call had been to her private secretary, asking for an immediate meeting with the palace's head of security. If the family wanted to play games with protocol and precedence, she would remind them exactly who they were dealing with. She was still Queen Camilla, still entitled to the respect and privileges that came with her position, and she intended to make sure everyone remembered that fact. The irony was not lost on her that she would be using the very system that had once excluded her to now defend her position, the complex web of royal hierarchy, the ancient protocols that governed palace life, the strict rules about precedence and respect. All of it would work in her favor now. William might be king, but there were certain traditions even he could not simply ignore. By mid-morning, word had spread through the palace staff that the Dowager Queen had requested a formal meeting with the royal household to clarify her continuing role and status. The request had been politely acknowledged, but Camilla could sense the underlying tension. The new regime had hoped she would fade quietly into the background, but instead she was forcing them to address her position directly. As she prepared for what she knew would be a crucial confrontation, Camilla thought about Charles and what he would have wanted. He had loved his sons deeply, but he had also loved her, had fought for their relationship against tremendous opposition, had made her his queen. She owed it to his memory to defend the dignity of the position he had given her. The call to assemble the royal guard had been her masterstroke. It was a formal privilege that belonged to her as Dowager Queen, one that could not be denied without cause. She would address them directly, would remind them of their oath of loyalty, and would make it clear that any attempt to diminish her status would be met with resistance. Standing now in her sitting room, watching the guards assemble in the courtyard below, Camilla felt a familiar surge of determination. She had faced down hostile crowds, critical media, and family opposition before. Today would be no different. She would remind everyone exactly who she was and what her position meant. And if William and Catherine wanted to challenge her authority, they would discover that the woman who had won over a nation was not someone to be underestimated. The courtyard of Buckingham Palace had seen many formal ceremonies over the centuries, but the scene unfolding on this crisp Tuesday morning felt different. The household division guards stood in perfect formation, their red tunics immaculate and their expressions carefully neutral. They had been summoned by Queen Camilla for what her private secretary had described as an important address regarding palace protocol and security arrangements. Major James Whitfield, the senior officer present, checked his watch discreetly. The Dowager Queen was precisely on time, as royal protocol demanded. He had served the royal family for 15 years, had been present for numerous state occasions and private ceremonies, but something about this gathering felt unusual. The formal nature of the summons, combined with the recent rumors circulating through the palace about tensions within the royal family, suggested this would be more than a routine address. The guards had been briefed only minimally about the purpose of their assembly. They knew that Queen Camilla wished to address them regarding their duties and loyalty, but the specific context remained unclear. What they did know was that the palace had been buzzing with activity since the early morning, with staff members hurrying through corridors in hushed conversations and several senior household officials arriving earlier than usual. Camilla emerged from the palace with the measured pace that years of royal training had ingrained in her. She wore a deep navy coat with the diamond and sapphire brooch that Charles had given her on their first anniversary. Her choice of jewelry was deliberate. The sapphires had once belonged to Queen Mary and represented continuity with royal tradition. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully considered to reinforce her status and authority. Behind her walked her lady-in-waiting and private secretary, their faces revealing nothing of the drama that had unfolded in the previous hours. The entire household staff now knew about the confrontation brewing between the Dowager Queen and the new king and queen. Word had spread quickly through the palace's extensive network of servants, each of whom understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in modern royal history. William and Catherine had been informed of Camilla's plans just 30 minutes before the ceremony began. Their response had been swift and decisive. Through their private secretary, They had sent word that they did not approve of the Dowager Queen addressing the guards in such a formal manner without prior consultation. They viewed it as an attempt to create division within the household and to challenge their authority as the new sovereigns. But Camilla had anticipated this reaction. Her decades of experience with royal protocol had taught her exactly how far she could push without technically breaking any rules. As Dowager Queen, she retained certain privileges and responsibilities that could not be simply revoked. The right to address the household guard was one of them. Rooted in traditions that predated the current generation by centuries, as she approached the assembled guards, Camilla could see the curious faces watching from various palace windows. Staff members had positioned themselves discreetly to witness what was becoming a historic moment. Even some of the younger royals, cousins, and extended family members who lived in grace and favor apartments within the palace complex had found reasons to be in areas where they could observe the proceedings. Major Whitfield called the guards to attention with a sharp command that echoed off the palace walls. The sound of boots clicking together in unison created a moment of perfect silence before Camilla began to speak. Her voice, trained through years of public appearances, carried clearly across the courtyard. "Officers and guardsmen of Her Majesty's Household Division," she began, using the traditional opening that emphasized her continuing royal status. "I have summoned you today to reaffirm the bonds of loyalty and service that have sustained our monarchy for centuries." The words were carefully chosen to invoke tradition and continuity. She spoke of the oath each guard had taken, not just to the crown as an institution, but to the individuals who wore it. She reminded them of their service to King Charles, of the respect and loyalty they had shown to him personally, and of the natural extension of that loyalty to his widow. As she continued, her message became more pointed. She spoke of the importance of stability during times of transition, of the need to maintain respect for all members of the royal family, regardless of changing circumstances. The guards listened with the impassive expressions their training demanded, but several showed subtle signs of understanding the subtext of her words. "I remain your queen," Camilla declared, her voice rising slightly as she reached the crescendo of her address. "The crown I wore beside King Charles was not merely ceremonial. It represents a sacred trust, a bond with the British people, and a responsibility that does not end with widowhood. I expect the same loyalty, the same respect, and the same protection that you provided to my late husband." The declaration hung in the air like a challenge. Major Whitfield felt the weight of the moment. Understanding that he was being asked to choose between competing claims to authority, the Dowager Queen was asserting her continuing status, but he also knew that King William and Queen Catherine were the current sovereigns, and their wishes regarding palace protocol should take precedence. The Major's response would become the moment that defined everything that followed. Years of military training had prepared him to make difficult decisions under pressure, but nothing had prepared him for navigating the complex politics of royal hierarchy during a family dispute. He stepped forward, his expression grave, and executed a perfect salute. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "The household division serves the crown and the royal family, according to the orders of the reigning sovereign. Our loyalty is absolute, but it must be directed through proper channels and established protocol." The careful phrasing of his response was a diplomatic masterpiece, acknowledging Camilla's status while subtly asserting that ultimate authority rested elsewhere. He continued, explaining that while the guards held great respect for her as Dowager Queen, their primary duty was to the current king and queen, and any instructions regarding security or protocol must come through the established chain of command. The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. She had expected some resistance, but the public nature of this gentle but firm rejection felt like a humiliation beyond anything she had experienced since the early days of her relationship with Charles. The carefully neutral expressions of the guards seemed to mock her attempt to assert her authority. But what stung most was the realization that Major Whitfield was right. The protocols she had hoped to use to defend her position were the same ones that now worked against her. As Dowager Queen, she retained certain privileges, but the ultimate authority belonged to William and Catherine. Her attempt to circumvent their wishes had only served to highlight her increasingly marginalized position. Behind her, she could sense the watching eyes of palace staff and family members. Some would be sympathetic to her plight. understanding the difficulty of her position and the unfairness of being pushed aside so quickly after Charles's death. Others would see her actions as presumptuous, an attempt to cling to power that rightfully belonged to the next generation. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Camilla absorbed the implications of Major Whitfield's response. She had gambled everything on this moment, believing that her status and the guards' respect for tradition would carry the day. Instead, she found herself publicly reminded of the limitations of her position and the reality of her changed circumstances. From a window on the first floor, William watched the scene unfold with a mixture of frustration and sadness. He had genuinely hoped to handle the transition more smoothly, to find a dignified role for Camilla that honored her service to his father, while allowing the monarchy to move forward. Her confrontational approach had forced his hand, requiring him to assert his authority in a way that he knew would cause lasting damage to their relationship. Catherine stood beside him, her expression carefully controlled. She understood the difficult position Camilla was in, but she also knew that allowing the Dowager Queen to challenge their authority would set a dangerous precedent. The monarchy's survival depended on clear lines of authority and respect for hierarchy. Sympathy could not be allowed to undermine the institution they were now responsible for leading. As Major Whitfield concluded his response and dismissed the guards, Camilla faced a moment of truth. She could accept this public reminder of her changed status and retreat gracefully, or she could escalate the confrontation further. The choice she made would determine not only her own future but also the nature of her relationship with William and Catherine for years to come. The guards began to disperse, their perfect formations dissolving as they returned to their regular duties. The ceremony was over, but its implications would ripple through the palace for months to come. Camilla had made her stand, and the response had shattered any illusions she might have had about her continuing influence within the royal household. The aftermath of the courtyard confrontation rippled through Buckingham Palace like stones thrown into still water. Within hours, news of the incident had reached every corner of the royal household, from the most senior officials to the kitchen staff. The carefully maintained facade of royal unity had cracked, revealing the deep tensions that had been building since King Charles's death. Camilla returned to her private quarters in a state of shock that she struggled to conceal from her staff. The public rejection of her authority by Major Whitfield had been delivered with military precision and diplomatic courtesy, but its impact was devastating. She had miscalculated badly, overestimating her own position and underestimating the loyalty that the household staff felt toward the new king and queen. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret Thornbury, had served the royal family for over 20 years and had witnessed numerous internal conflicts. She understood better than most the delicate balance of power that governed palace life and the catastrophic nature of what had just occurred. As she helped Camilla remove her formal coat and jewelry, her silence spoke volumes about the gravity of the situation. The immediate consequences were swift and decisive. Within 2 hours of the courtyard incident, Camilla received a formal request to attend a private meeting with King William and Queen Catherine. The summons came through proper channels, delivered by the king's private secretary with all the courtesy that protocol demanded, but its urgent timing left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. The meeting took place in the king's private study, a room that had once been Charles's sanctuary and now served as William's primary workspace. The familiar surroundings felt strange and hostile as Camilla entered to find William seated behind the large mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather, King George VI. Catherine stood by the window, her posture formal and her expression carefully controlled. William's opening words were measured but firm. He explained that Camilla's actions had created an impossible situation within the household and had forced him to clarify lines of authority that he had hoped could remain informal. The attempt to circumvent established protocol by directly addressing the guards had been seen by the household staff as a challenge to his authority, and he could not allow such challenges to continue. Catherine's contribution to the conversation was perhaps even more devastating. Speaking with the quiet confidence that had made her such an effective queen, she outlined the practical implications of Camilla's actions. The household staff were confused about lines of authority, security protocols had been disrupted, and the incident was already generating speculation among the media about divisions within the royal family. The discussion that followed was painful but necessary. William made it clear that while he respected Camilla's position as his stepmother and valued her years of service to his father, he could not permit any further challenges to his authority. The monarchy's survival depended on clear leadership and unified command, and any attempt to create parallel power structures would be met with immediate and decisive action. Camilla's response revealed both her desperation and her remaining dignity. She acknowledged that her approach had been misguided but maintained that her underlying concerns remained valid. She spoke passionately about her years of service, her love for Charles, and her desire to continue contributing to the monarchy's mission. Her voice broke as she described feeling pushed aside and forgotten, her contributions dismissed as soon as it became convenient. The emotional core of the confrontation emerged as Camilla detailed the isolation she had felt since Charles's death, the gradual exclusion from decision-making, the subtle signals that her presence was no longer welcome, the growing sense that she was being treated as an inconvenience rather than a valued family member. Her actions in the courtyard, she explained, had been born of desperation rather than ambition. William's response showed both the weight of his new responsibilities and the personal pain the situation caused him. He admitted that the transition had been handled poorly, that in their focus on establishing their own authority, he and Catherine had failed to properly consider Camilla's feelings and her legitimate needs as a widow still grieving her husband's death. The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship, but not in the way Camilla had hoped. Instead of reinforcing her position, it led to a clear and final delineation of roles and expectations. William outlined a new arrangement that would preserve Camilla's dignity while ensuring there could be no future challenges to his authority. The compromise that emerged was both generous and limiting. Camilla would retain her title and receive the full honors due to a dowager queen, but her role would be clearly ceremonial. She would attend state functions and family occasions, would maintain her patronages and charitable work, but would have no involvement in the operational decisions of the royal household. The most significant change was the confirmation of her relocation to Clarence House. The move was presented as a return to her roots, allowing her to establish her own household and court while remaining connected to the broader royal family. Private apartments would be maintained at both Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle for her use during official functions, but her primary residence would be separate from the working royal household. The financial arrangements were generous, reflecting both William's genuine affection for his stepmother and his understanding of the public relations implications of the situation. Camilla would retain a substantial household budget, security detail, and official staff, ensuring that her lifestyle and public presence could continue without interruption. But the emotional cost was enormous. The woman who had fought so hard to be accepted as queen, who had slowly won over a skeptical nation through years of dedicated service, now found herself gracefully but firmly marginalized. The crown that had felt so heavy that morning would never again carry the same authority or significance. The public announcement of the new arrangements was crafted with typical royal diplomacy. It spoke of Dowager Queen Camilla's desire to establish her own independent household, allowing her to focus on her charitable work while supporting the new king and queen in their duties. The language emphasized choice and positive change, carefully concealing the confrontation that had made the arrangement necessary. Major Whitfield, whose response had precipitated the crisis, was quietly reassigned to other duties. His handling of the situation had been professionally correct but politically explosive, and the palace decided that a change of personnel would help draw a line under the incident. He departed with full honors and a commendation for his service, but everyone understood the real reason for his transfer. The broader implications of the confrontation extended far beyond the individuals involved. The incident had revealed the fragility of royal unity and the ongoing challenges of managing succession within the modern monarchy. It also highlighted the particular difficulties faced by spouses who married into the royal family, especially those who might outlive their royal partners. For the palace staff, the incident served as a reminder of the complex loyalties that governed their professional lives. Many had served Camilla faithfully during her years as queen consort and felt genuine sympathy for her current situation. However, their primary duty was to the institution of the monarchy and its current leadership, regardless of their personal feelings. The media response, when it eventually emerged, focused on the graceful nature of the transition and Camilla's decision to establish her own independent household. The palace's communication strategy successfully portrayed the change as a natural evolution rather than the result of internal conflict. But astute royal watchers noted the speed and finality of the arrangements. In the weeks that followed, Camilla began the process of establishing her new life at Clarence House. The historic residence, with its elegant Georgian architecture and beautiful gardens, provided a dignified setting for her reduced but still significant role. She threw herself into the work of establishing her new household and expanding her charitable activities, finding purpose and fulfillment in roles that did not depend on her proximity to the throne. The relationship between Camilla and the new king and queen gradually healed, though it never fully recovered the warmth that had existed during Charles's lifetime. William and Catherine made genuine efforts to include her in family occasions and to acknowledge her contributions publicly. But the fundamental shift in dynamics could not be undone. The confrontation had taught all parties valuable lessons about the delicate balance required to maintain royal relationships during times of transition. For Camilla, it was a painful reminder that love and loyalty, while important, could not override the institutional requirements of monarchy. For William and Catherine, it highlighted the need for sensitivity and clear communication when managing family relationships that had public implications. Years later, historians would mark this incident as a defining moment in the early reign of King William V. It demonstrated his willingness to make difficult decisions when necessary, while also showing his commitment to treating family members with dignity and respect. The graceful resolution of what could have become a damaging public feud was seen as evidence of his growing confidence as a leader and his understanding of the complex responsibilities that came with the crown. For Camilla, the episode represented both an ending and a beginning. The woman who had once been one of the most controversial figures in Britain had successfully transformed herself into a respected queen, only to face the reality that even queens must sometimes step aside for the greater good of the institution they serve. Her legacy would ultimately rest not on the power she had briefly held, but on the grace with which she had learned to let it go.